Thank you, Tammy. Welcome. We're so excited to have you here today to talk more about mid-career career professionals that are ready to make career moves and how they can network. So, to start off, I'd love to talk about a question related to career restarts. So, if somebody has been out of the paid workforce for so long that they've lost their professional network, what should they do now and where can they start?
Yeah, so thank you, Gabby. Thank you so much for having me. I love being part of these Power to Fly events. They're always so amazing. So I want people to let go of the notion that you've lost anything because they're there, they're out there, and people love to connect and love to reconnect with people that they worked with. So start by reaching out to people that you worked with. Hey, I'm headed back to work after taking some time off with my kids to take care of my mom, whatever the situation might have been, and would love to connect with you again. Would love to talk to you about what you've been up to and kind of see how it's going. And you'd be surprised. People will be like, "Oh, hey, I remember. Of course, I remember you," and all of that. But I also want to remind people that your network, it's not just the people that you worked with, right? Like your network is all the people that surround you in your life. And you live in a community. You might have other parents at the Cub Scout troop or the soccer field, whatever your kids happen to do. And if if you've been taking care of your parents or other loved ones, you might have people that you've been interacting with through some support groups. Whatever it is in your community, whatever things you are part of, those people often have jobs, right? Start conversations. I tell particularly moms, like if you've been a stay-at-home mom, there are probably moms in your community who are working moms. Like hang out with them, ask them what they do, right? Ask them about their jobs, ask the dads about their jobs, right? So talk to the people in your community, and slowly over time, that's how you start to rebuild your network again and refresh it. Really is the way I want you to think about it, as opposed to having to capture something that was lost.
I love that. That's a great reframe to think about networking. It's not just professional, but our communities are our networks. I think that's a really impactful thought to take away from what you just said. And when I think about networking as well, a lot of people think about LinkedIn, right? And so if we're utilizing LinkedIn, and it's a powerful networking tool,
Oh,
but if anybody on here has utilized LinkedIn, we know that not everybody we reach out to always replies to us. So, how can career pivoters get the attention of the people that they want to meet?
yeah. So I really do recommend that people start with people they already know or at least have some connection to, right? That's going to have a much higher hit rate. The blind outreach is never quite as effective as reaching out to people that you already know or have known. If you've had a career for a while, whether you're working currently or not, right? If you left college 10, even 20, 30 years ago for some of us, um, you have connections from the early part of your career with people who have probably made their own career pivots. Right, your network has grown and changed and morphed over that period of time in a way that that's probably going to be interesting for you. So as you start, I think LinkedIn starts for most people, should start for most people as a research tool. Hey, whatever happened to so and so? What's so and so up to now, right? And particularly if you've been out of the workforce, remember to look at people who maybe were junior to you when you started, or when they started, because they've probably advanced in their career and potentially moved into different areas. So start to research the people that you worked with, because they'll have moved and worked, changed around. Start reconnecting with some of those people. But as you start connecting with people, even if they're in the field that you want to get out of, they may have connections. Think of it like concentric circles, right? Like start with the people that you have the closest connection to. And then, hey, can you introduce me to? Oh, I see you're connected to so and so. Could you introduce me to them? Could you introduce me to this other person? And your network will grow outward in that way.
I love that. Yeah. So thinking about the entire length of our careers and how not just the last touch point we've had But whatever we've done throughout our entire careers, that's an accessible network to us. And to remind ourselves of that is really important. So thank you for
Well, I
sharing.
started out, Meg gave my very long bio. Thank you, Meg. That was so lovely of you. Um, I started out my career in book publishing, and did a whole bunch of other things, and now I run a nonprofit. So what's interesting about that, like I think of that from my own career pivot story, but as you're asking me this question, I'm thinking of it from the flip way around. Like if there was someone who I worked with back in my Simon and Schuster days who's now interested in nonprofits, hey, they're already connected to me, right? They don't have to find some like mythical LinkedIn amazing person who they don't know and write the perfect intro letter to get them to respond. Like they can reach out to me. I will probably remember them. And I'm now in the field that they want to get into. So it's probably closer than you think.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. Yeah, assessing what you have instead of recreating the wheel,
Right.
which can sound very daunting and feel very daunting for people. And especially when it comes to networking and folks that feel like that they're introverts, right? That it could be a daunting
Yeah.
task to network. And so what's a good networking strategy for folks that feel a little either more shy or more introverted in the career field or re-entering the career field?
Okay, so I love this question so much because I think so. People hear the word networking, they're like, you watch them like slump over, like, oh, must I? Do I have to do that? Please don't make me, right? And especially the introverts. And it's like everybody has this image in their mind of like this big event with people, and there's maybe drinks, and you're trying to, you've got your little plate and your name tag, and it's all so awkward, and you don't know anyone in the room. And of course, that sounds awful. And if you're an introvert, that sounds extra awful. And the great news is that's not networking. That's I don't know what that is, but that's not networking, right? That's like being in a room full of strangers and trying to have a glass of Chardonnay. That's not so interesting. Networking is, at its best, networking is knowledge sharing and it's relational. So networking is actually better in smaller groups and one to one, right? Um, Big forum, conferences can be great. They can be great ways to get information and meet lots of people. For people who like that kind of thing, like keep doing that kind of thing, it can be great. But it's not the best way to build authentic connections, right? So the way to build authentic connections is to reach out with people and have a chat. Like, hey, I think the way I think about networking is I think about it as knowledge sharing. So when you approach someone and it's very obvious that you want them to help you get a job, particularly at their company, that's going to make people kind of go, oh, I don't know. I don't really know the person. I'm not sure. Send me your resume, I guess, right? And that's a transactional view of networking, which is, again, how many people think of networking, right? Like you get me a job, I get you a job. That's how we do this, right? And that's not the best way to do it. What's much better, particularly for restarters and career pivoters, is to approach someone with a mode of inquiry. I want to learn about your career. I want to know how you got to where you are. I want to know what skills and experiences you have had that have helped you to be successful in your career. Here's the thing. Flattery and letting people talk about themselves is a far underutilized tactic in career advancement. People love to talk about themselves. It's their favorite subject. It's everyone's favorite subject, right? So reaching out to someone and saying, hey, I would love 20 minutes to hear about what you've been doing the last 5 years and how you've made the pivot that you've made or how you've advanced at your career or what you like about your company. That's a much easier ask. And the thing is, in the course of that conversation, you're going to get information that's going to help you figure out, is that a job you actually want? Do you have skills that could transfer to that job? What kinds of skills do you not have that you would need to get? Now you can go take a class. What are the experiences that are most relevant in that job, right? And now you know someone who works in that job that you can go back to later and say, hey, I took this class and I'm applying to this job. And if you happen to know someone, right? And you're building that in an authentic and real way and not just like, hey, you used to work with me a million years ago. Could you give my resume to somebody? Which is
Mhm.
not a real and authentic connection.
Yeah, so it's like the reverse engineering of it, right? Is
Yeah.
learning about a person and getting into their story and then seeing the how as to how they've gotten where they are. I think that's really important because I think people look at maybe somebody who's made a career pivot and they say, "Oh, they have this job, they have what I want, but I don't know what the how is. I don't know what the next step is. I don't know what I need." And we could do endless research, but networking is probably an even better tool to utilize to see how people get to where they are. And so, yeah, would love to hear a little bit more about that career pivoting and trying to find jobs in completely new industries when they don't have contacts in that industry. And you said, utilize your own network, try to go back in time. But what if people are really starting off from not knowing even how to utilize LinkedIn or are starting really from ground zero? So, would love to hear a little bit
So
about working there.
yeah, so first of all, what I'm going to say is that's definitely it's a harder jump to make. So one thing I always recommend pivoters start by doing is kind of thinking about like what is it that you think you want to do? Why is it that you think you want to do that? Right? If you don't know anybody in an industry, are you so sure that's an industry you want to go into? So that's kind of a question to sort of ask yourself. But actually, this is the place. I know I'm going to go back on what I said before, but this is a place if you're making that kind of big jump where events actually can be super helpful, right?
Yeah.
Because and pick them wisely, and especially in like and there's so much stuff you can do online now. But that's where, first of all, you can get information a little bit more efficiently at an event with an industry focus. But there is often networking breaks and things like that. And yeah, they're going to be a little awkward. They're not quite as, I think, comfy as what I've been talking about here in terms of like reaching out to the people that you know. But they can be an efficient way to get, a few contacts in an industry that you might not have had connection with before. LinkedIn is such a powerful tool that the great news is you can start with a few connections and you will build very quickly, right? Um, and I saw the power of that when I started Path Forward. I had never worked in nonprofits before, ever, when I started Path Forward. And of course, because of people that were on my board and connections I had, I did get introduced to a few people. But the way that moved from like having a few nonprofit connections to now my network is like dominated by nonprofit professionals, right? Because each one introduces you. It's like the old Breck Girl commercial. She told two friends, and she told two friends, and am I the only one who's old enough to get that joke? Um, I feel like I am, but right. So it will grow very exponentially. So one way to sort of fast forward that process for yourself is to go to a few events, attend the networking sessions, meet a couple people. It's also sometimes easier to meet high level people if you walk up to them after they've given a talk, like, hey, that was really interesting. I'd love to connect with you. And you kind of have at least a little piece of shared connection that you can build on.
Yeah, that's so interesting too, is even thinking about events of not maybe it's not even labeled networking, right? Maybe it's not even a
Right.
networking event, but it's an event that you're interested in or is related in your career or is a talk and then
Totally.
going
Yeah.
there and talking with the audience so it could feel like it's not networking, more like it's socializing in a sense.
You can also look to your alma mater if you went to college. If their career center has services, sometimes you can get connected through your alumni community. And people will often connect with someone from their school community that they might not have like just blind outreach. So again, think about what some of those points of connection might be that you can build on.
Yeah, love that. And I see somebody ask from the audience, what's the biggest mistake a job seeker can make when networking?
So I think the first thing I would say is like networking is like it's something you should be doing kind of continuously, and mistakes are going to happen. It's fine. Nobody's going to die. It's like nobody dies of embarrassment. I know it feels like it, but you cannot actually die of embarrassment. That's not a thing. So it's going to be fine. So just don't get hung up on mistakes. But I would say the thing that people do that is less likely to be successful for them is really focusing on the transactional piece of networking. Like, who can get me a job is not the primary way to think about it. first of all, it's going to limit who you connect with. You're going to think of it like, oh, I need to connect with people who are very high up in a company who can hire me or whatever, who may or may not be very accessible to you, but also you will miss out on all the information and potential knowledge sharing that you can get from people at all levels of an organization. So being too transactional and thinking just in terms of like, who can get me a job as opposed to who can I learn from, who has information that I need, who can connect me to other people that have information that I need, right? And starting to see it as a process of connecting. People don't like networking, but we all love to connect with each other,
Mhm.
right? And when we think of it that way, I think that's more likely to lead to success.
Yeah, we had a comment from the audience from Jessica as well, saying, I did heavy networking for so many years, especially as part of my previous job. The only connections that are the ones where you either give them something or they give you. This is what makes acquaintances last. So, really treating it as acquaintances or even making it be like a social feeling rather than like this networking, this transactional piece is very helpful. And when I'm thinking about this too, and the way we show up and the way that we network when we're seeking a job, I'm curious if you have any tips. Somebody asked, can you share tips for shy people? I think we talked about that a little bit with the
Yeah.
introvertedness, but I want to pivot that question a little bit to asking, how do we sell ourselves even? How do we talk about ourselves? How do we present ourselves in a way when we don't really know what we can offer or we don't know our fullest potential?
So this is where I go back to starting with your local community, like whether that's a mom's group, or if you're in a caregivers group, support groups, your friends, right? People who are going to be kind, and starting to practice with them, right? Like, hey, I'm thinking about going back to work. Hey, I'm going to go to this conference about a new industry or a new career that I'm interested in. I'm going to be introducing myself. Can I practice introducing myself to you? So that I can kind of, first of all, shake the nerves out, kind of get like the most awkward time is the first time, right? For most things. Can I, write out your elevator pitch or how you would introduce yourself to someone at an event and practice with your friends, practice with the people in your local community who are more likely to be kind, but also like hopefully you have some friends who will give you some real feedback, like, oh yeah, that was your best version yet, right? Like people who will let you do that for a few rounds and give you some feedback so you can. And part of it is just it's not so much the feedback that you're going to get. Hopefully you have friends who can give you good feedback, and that's lovely. But it's about how you'll get the feedback for yourself because you will hear it when you say it out
Right.
loud. You will hear it in a way that it doesn't quite sound in your head. And you'll just get more comfortable and confident with it. You'll be able to do that. So then when you're in the situation with someone you don't know or you don't know as well, or you're reconnecting with, it will feel a little more natural, and you won't feel so worried about how you're going to sound.
Yeah, so practicing with people you know, and would you suggest even practicing in maybe lower stake situations where you're networking with people that aren't really related to the industry or job that you want?
Totally. Yes, absolutely. And potentially a way to also reconnect with people in your from your prior career as well. So again, a little bit lower stakes. Someone who maybe knew you well, who worked with you, who'd be willing to have a quick coffee, do a Zoom connect, where you can practice some of that stuff, and the stakes are going to be a little bit lower because again, they may know you and have fun memories of you, but also if you're looking to get out of that industry anyways, and you're just kind of trying to, reconnect with some folks who might be able to connect you to others, etc., the stakes can be a little bit lower, and you can kind of give yourself some practice rounds. I recommend people go on interviews too if they get asked for them, even if you're not sure if you want the job, for the same reason. Like the first couple, particularly if you're coming back into the workforce after a long break, the first couple interviews are going to be like, oof, they're going to be a little bit bumpy for you. So let those be the ones, let those be the jobs you maybe aren't so like, I mean, who knows? I've been wrong before. You could get lucky and have a great first interview, but it's good to give yourself a couple rounds of that and be able to work out the kinks.
Yes, and not having that fear of the outcome, right? It's like if we go to networking or we're trying to network and we're saying, oh, I really need this. I really need this person to be on my side. There's more at stake. And so it could be more nerve-wracking. But to, yeah, practice interviews with maybe a job that you're not sure you want. I love that piece of advice, just to get going because honestly, it's really hard to do it without doing it. And
100%, a
yeah,
hundred
we
percent. And
get
you never know, it might end up being a great show. Like that's there's also a you've got to let some serendipity enter into this whole process too. You just never know. Like go to the event, have the coffee, reach out to the person you think surely will not accept your connection. You just don't know. You never know. Life is funny that way.
Yes, yeah, there's somewhat of being a yes person there is
Yeah.
just seeing, yeah. I love the idea is that you might not know where like you're going to be from A to Z, but just focus on the B or focus on the C, just focus on the next step and saying yes to the next opportunity that feels right. So I love that. And so I have a question from the audience. Maya asks, would you be able to share any tips around things to consider if one wants to start a nonprofit? And I'm going to piggyback off that. And I would love for you to share your story a little bit, Tami, how you created your career pivot, how networking really helped you, and then how that really helped you to start where you didn't have experience before.
Yeah, so I was working for a small software company, the data solutions provider that Meg mentioned in my bio, and the HR department created this return to work program for primarily at the time women coming back to work from caregiving, and it kind of grew into its own little program where other companies were asking this marketing technology company for help running their HR initiative, which seemed odd since that was not a job, that was not something we were selling as a company. It was just something that these other HR people were wanting help with because they saw what our HR team was doing and how cool it was. So the executives got together and said, "Hey, we should do this. This would be cool if we could work with companies and help them to create these programs and maybe make these programs proliferate further than they have so far." So a bunch of us decided to start a nonprofit. And it's interesting. I really do think starting Path Forward in some ways changed how I thought about networking, not just through the people I met who were restarting their careers and seeing how impactful networking could be for them, both in finding opportunities, but also in getting support through those, right, the support networks that they were creating for themselves to be able to make that transition and make it successfully, and the support networks we were helping them to create to do that. But for me personally, I didn't know anything about running a nonprofit, which surely did not stop me. So it really changed how I thought about networking. Like it was like I was really just looking for information because I had the job. It really did. It did create a space for me to really be non-transactional about it, right? Like I'm not looking for you to hire me. I'm looking for you to tell me what you've done and how you've done it, and give me some advice and kind of help me on my journey. And people are surprisingly open to that. And it was like, oh, I should have been doing it this way all along. This is a much better way to connect with people. And I would often offer people like, hey, I'm good at some things, so I'm happy to help you with your PR strategy, for example, if I can be of service. I actually, very early on in my networking, I had one, he was a nonprofit CEO, and he was like, you know what, just help somebody else later. Like when you get good at this, just help somebody else later. And I thought that idea that I'm going to help you even though you can't help me because someday you're going to help someone who can't help you, and that relational does not necessarily have to be direct. Again, getting out of this idea of transactional, but instead that relational piece of it can also be about like, hey, I'm going to make you be a better nonprofit executive, and you're gonna take that energy forward, and it's all to the good. So I've always kind of kept that idea with me.
Yeah, I love that. It's yeah, the pay it forward. It doesn't have to go directly back to the person it came from. And they have trust in that. And that when you are in a position where you can help and network with other people, you have that kind of in your back pocket and said, "Oh, I'm here because of my network, and so I want to help people achieve the same as well," which is awesome.
Yeah.
So I have a question too. So there could be this almost viewpoint on finding a job as people enter the workforce and say, "Oh, well, I could just find a job online. I could do it by myself. What's the point of networking?" What would you say? And I know we probably touched a little bit on this throughout this talk today, but what would you say to folks like that where they say, "Oh, I don't really need a network. I could just do it on my own."
So I went to a talk once, I think it was actually at a Grace Hopper, and there was a company that was talking about how they were, one of their diversity initiatives that was around recruiting. And one of the things that they realized is that their referrals, people who had come through another employee, were getting through the recruiting process at a higher rate than others were, which is fine and good. But also that the referrals tended to look a lot like the people that already worked at the company, right? That the referral network was not very diverse, right? Most of the, in this case, this is a tech company. In the case, most of the employees were young white men who referred other young white men, which is all fine and good. But if you're trying to diversify your staff, is not super helpful. But one of the questions they asked themselves that I thought was so fascinating was like, what is making, is it the imprimatur of the referral that's making them get through the process, or are there other things going on? And one of the things they discovered that was so interesting is that the referrer, the employee, was helping the referral, right? They were giving them, oh, you're going to meet with so and so. Here's what they care about.
Yeah.
Oh, you're doing this interview. They're going to ask you these questions. Here's what to prepare for, right? And sometimes they had some swag that maybe their friend had shared, right? They seemed a part of the company already, right? They had literally had this inside track. So what this company started to do to level the playing field, which is something you should pay attention to actually, is they started to produce guides for, right, how to get through our recruiting process. But I think it's an interesting example of where it wasn't just that people had that personal connection to someone, it was what they were getting from that personal connection. And that's that knowledge sharing piece, right? Who is important in this company? What's the hierarchy? Who actually makes decisions? What kinds of questions are they going to ask me? What kinds of answers are they looking for? Right?
Yes.
And that is where, again, it's like, if your old school idea is like, oh, I'm going to meet the boss, he's going to see my resume, he's going to pass it to the right person, I'm going to get hired. Boom. That's not networking. That's not a thing that happens. That's just not a thing. I mean, I guess it does, but that's not what this is about, right? It's about those conversations that help you see. And also, by the way, it always mystifies me, right? Job seekers will ask questions about like, well, how much vacation time do I get? Which, okay, fine. It's a fine question to ask, but it doesn't make you look great as a job seeker. But that's something you want to know, right? And actually what you really want to know is, does anyone take vacation here? Or is it like,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Is it like a sweatshop, right? That is a question you can ask someone on the side and
Mhm.
get the real information you need without having to ask your future boss, like, so it's pretty flexible here. Friday's not a thing? Great, right? Like that's you can show up the way you want to show up in your interviews, but get that real cultural information. I'm not saying you shouldn't ask the bosses that you're meeting with like really true good cultural questions. There's absolutely ways to ask those questions and get good information.
Right.
But the side network is so helpful for really finding out, what is this company like to work for? Is this somewhere I want to be?
I love that. And with that, I know we're at time, Tammy.
This
I
was so
appreciate
great.
this.
Gabby, this was fantastic. Meg,
Yes,
it's always great to see you.
yes.
Thank you,
Everyone go
Tammy.
out there and network. Now you have all the tools in your toolbox. Tammy, until next time, great speaking with you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your conference.